Hi, we're having a conversation with Tutu Alicante, who is Executive Director of EG Justice in Guinea Equatorial. Tutu, I'm thinking that corruption is somehow like fungi. It's hard to get rid of it, and you get rid of it and it comes back again. Is that accurate?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So I'm from Equatorial Guinea. Equatorial Guinea is perhaps the best example of how corruption can destroy a nation, right? Equatorial Guinea has the highest GDP per capita on the sub-Saharan African continent. Our GDP per capita is on par with many of the European nations. Yet when you look at the Human Development Index, we have the highest gap, the widest gap between Human Development Index and GDP or income per capita, right? Why was that created? And again, we have to realize the GDP per capita, Human Development Index, this might sound like very esoteric words, but what that really means, is human beings. Human beings. How much money can a human being, can a family of 4 live with in Equatorial Guinea? And most families today, most human beings in Equatorial Guinea today, in fact, 80% of them are living with less than $1 a day. What that means, is that when your kid is sick, you cannot take them to the hospital. When your kid needs to go to school, you cannot afford for your kids to go to school. And what that means also, is that when you have a problem and you go to the hospital, you're more likely to come out of that hospital dead than alive. Now, why is that created? It's because you live in a country where impunity is at its highest. You have a government that is not accountable to anyone. Despite that high GDP per capita, the government is not investing in those basic things that it should be investing in. How do you change that? And how do you ensure that it doesn't come back? You work on establishing the rule of law. And that is fundamentally what is lacking in Equatorial Guinea. And I will bet you that that's fundamentally what's lacking in many of those countries where corruption seems to be a fungi problem that you work on it and comes back. If there is a rule of law, if there is separation of powers, if the judiciary can hold the executive accountable, if citizens have a voice in the political process, you can get rid of corruption.
A Guatemalan shouldn't do this question, but how does a society get to this point in which corruption is so horrible that it affects the whole society and impoverishes the big majority of population? What set of mind allows that?
That's a very good question. Many of us struggle to understand, what is the psychology that leads to this type of kleptocrats that create these very imbalanced, very unequal societies. I think it comes down to human greed. It comes down to a human being that do not see other human beings as human beings, right? Most of us, are born in a context in which we think we are all humans and we should treat each other equally. But as you grow up, whether it's because of the people that surround you, whether it's because of some part of the culture that becomes so ingrained in your own upbringing, you begin to see other people as less. Whether it's because of their ethnic background, whether it's because of their religious background, whether it's because of their gender, etc. And you stop treating those people as human beings just like you. And you use that justification, whether it's, again, ethnic, religious, gender, to justify why you should have a better economic access, why you should have better jobs, better education, etc., and why this person, because they're a woman, because they're from another ethnic group, because they're a Muslim and you're a Christian, should deserves less than you do. And eventually you get to the position where power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And at that point, then, it can go out of hand unless you have a system in place that can reestablish the rule of law.
Now, for me, it's kind of easy to understand the point of view of the kleptocrat. I liked that you used the word kleptocrat. But from the point of view of society, why do people allow, elect, vote support, hail the kleptocrats?
So it depends. It depends on a lot of things. In the Equatorial Guinean context, in Equatorial Guinea, which is the one I know best, sadly, we went from having colonialism imposed by Spain on Equatorial Guineans, again, 200 years of colonialism, to having one of the worst dictatorships in the history of the world. What did colonialism do? Colonialism reduced people to slaves, people that did not have rights, people that have no human dignity. The next government that came, Francisco Macias, again, this was under Spanish Franco. Franco was the president then, who was doing the same exact thing in Spain back then. Treated human beings in his own country exactly the way the colonialists have treated us. The current president came and treated people the way he saw his uncle treat people and the way he saw colonialism treat people, right? So in our almost 250 years of history since colonialism, there hasn't been any period, any time for human beings in that society to see themselves as free entities that have a choice on anything. We've always seen ourselves, sadly, as subjects that belong to the Spanish Madre Patria, that belong to the dictator in place, right? I think the only way to change that is engaging citizens, raising awareness, raising consciousness, right? Concienciación of the people, so that they realize that, yes, I am a human being. Yes, I have rights. Yes, this country belongs to us. I think that's the only way to change that.
You have a long and important history in defending and fighting for the human rights. Mm-hmm. Do you ever feel discouraged?
I don't. I started this work when I was 19 years old. I had a conversation with my father after the military had gone to our village and destroyed our home about what could be done. Our home was destroyed. 3 young men in my village were killed. And my father told me that there was nothing we could do. I knew there was something we could do. I didn't know what it was. I refused to believe that there was nothing a citizen living in a country could do to change that type of violent usurpation of human dignity, right? And that's around the time that I moved to the United States with one clear concept of what I wanted to do. I wanted to acquire tools that will help me change the arc of history in my country, right? They will help me bring about justice. Since then, I've never felt discouraged. I got to the United States where I was able to learn about great people who have done great things despite great odds. The Mandelas, the Martin Luther Kings, the Gandhis, and all these human beings like you and I who went about changing greater odds than what we have today in Equatorial Guinea. When I look at these histories, when I look at what has happened around the world, when I look at what Guatemalans were able to do here very few months ago to change a corrupt regime, I cannot get discouraged. When I look at the young people in Equatorial Guinea and the things that we were able to do right now, I cannot get discouraged. When I look at the same father, my father, who once told me that there was nothing we could do, who passed away last year, unfortunately, but when I had my last conversation with my father, he was telling me, look, I'm very encouraged by what you're doing the right thing, keep working on it. Those things, those different pieces tell me that, we're on the right track.
You mentioned justice, Tutu. What does justice mean in this context?
Justice means having all citizens in that country having access to education, having access to healthcare, having access to housing, having access to decide who should govern them, having access. We live in a context today in this world where most people see themselves as subject of something else, and it's not just Equatorial Guinea, it's not just Africa, right? Most people feel that, their fate depends on somebody else. You look at the migration issues right now going on in Europe, Someone coming from Iraq or coming from Syria feel that their fate depends on what Germany, what Spain, Italy, or what the European Union decides. You look at the United States today, young black men in the United States feel that their fate depends on what the policeman says or decides, or what the U.S. Department of Justice does or does not do. You look all around the world today, many of us, are feeling that we do not have that access, And for me, justice, is reverting that. It's giving people access, telling people that, you are an agent in your future. You can determine what your life is going to be like.
Finally, Tutu, if a student approaches you and asks, how can I get involved in fighting corruption? Do you have a 30 seconds advice?
I do. And I hope a student will ask me this while I'm here in beautiful Guatemala. Our organization, we work with interns. That is one way. We are trying to send more people from around the world to Equatorial Guinea to work with some of the organizations that we work with on the ground. It's important to build that solidarity. Equatorial Guinea is the only Spanish-speaking nation in sub-Saharan Africa. So concretely with Guatemala, we share strong relationships. We speak the same language. We were colonized by the same people. We mostly have the same religion. There are many bonds, many links that hold us together. It is very, very important for me while I'm here in Guatemala to impress upon the students in Guatemala that there is a group of forgotten brothers out there in Equatorial Guinea, that there is a lot that we can share. There's a lot that we can give to that community.
Thank you, Tutu, for sharing these ideas and experiences with us. And thank you too.